"Don't touch me!" Damien's voice cracked like thunder across the marble study, his pale face streaked with sweat, his chest heaving as though each breath was a battle. In his clenched fist rattled a bottle of pills, and on the floor at his feet lay the shattered glass Naomi had knocked away. Naomi's hands trembled. "Please, please don't do this," she whispered, her wide brown eyes glossy with tears. She had only meant to help, but now the room felt like a storm about to swallow her whole. Damien's jaw tightened, his ice-blue eyes hardening. "Do you think you understand anything about me? About what I do? You're a maid, nothing more." His words sliced sharper than glass, and Naomi flinched as if struck. For a moment, silence pressed down on the room. Then Naomi did the only thing her heart told her to do. She turned and fled, her shoes echoing against the cold marble as tears blurred her vision. The mansion loomed heavy in the quiet hours of the evening. Chandeliers glimmered above polished floors, portraits of forgotten ancestors stared from gilded frames, and the staff moved like ghosts in Damien Devereaux's kingdom. Most had learned to keep their eyes down, their voices low, their heads bowed. Naomi Clark had always been one of them. At 23, she carried herself with the quiet grace of someone who knew invisibility was safer than attention. Her dark brown skin seemed to catch the low light like bronze, her hair pulled back beneath a plain scarf. The uniform she wore was clean but threadbare at the cuffs, her shoes polished though scuffed from long hours. She had learned to move softly, to blend into walls, to make herself so small she could not offend. But tonight, she could not shake the echo of Damien's rage. She wiped at her face in the small, cracked mirror above the staff washroom sink. Her reflection startled her, eyes red, cheeks streaked. She hated Letton. Did anyone see her cry? She remembered her mother's words. "Tears don't buy bread, Naomi. Strength does." Yet here she was, weak in a house that had no patience for weakness. From down the hall, voices carried. Two other maids whispered sharply, their words slipping through the hush. She tried to grab him. "Can you imagine? No wonder he yelled." "Foolish girl. She'll be gone by morning." Naomi's throat tightened. Humiliation was heavy, almost heavier than fear. She thought of her younger brother Malik, still in school, depending on her wages to keep their tiny apartment warm. She couldn't lose this job, not because of one mistake, not because she cared too much. And yet, she had seen something. Damien's hands had shaken. His face had gone pale. The pills had not looked like something ordinary. Was he sick? Was he truly trying to hurt himself? Or was it something darker? The questions swirled, but Naomi knew one thing. The look in his eyes had not been of anger alone. Beneath the fire, there had been something raw. The next morning, Damien strode into the dining hall with his usual command of space. He wore a charcoal gray suit, perfectly tailored, his golden hair slicked back, his face carved into composure. But Naomi noticed the stiffness in his movements, the slight tremor when he lifted his coffee cup. The staff lined the walls, standing silently as always. Naomi stood among them, eyes lowered, but she could feel his gaze flicker to her for the briefest of seconds. The memory of last night hung between them like a shadow no one else could see. "Breakfast is late," Damien snapped, though it wasn't. His voice carried the bite of someone who needed control over something, anything. "Yes, sir," the butler murmured, bowing. Naomi's hands clenched at her sides. She told herself to stay quiet, to stay invisible. Yet her heart thudded with the weight of what she had witnessed, of what no one else dared notice. That night, alone in her small attic room at the top of the mansion, Naomi sat by the window. Outside, the gardens glowed silver in the moonlight. She thought of her mother's funeral, of Malik's tired smile when she sent him money for books, of Damien's pale face when the pills shook in his hand. For the first time, she whispered into the quiet, "What are you hiding, Damien Devereaux?" The mansion seemed to sigh back in answer, its walls full of secrets, and Naomi realized, whether or not he wanted her to, she had already stepped too close to the truth. Naomi froze mid-step as laughter rippled through the servants' hall. She knew the sound wasn't warm, it was sharp, mocking, aimed straight at her. "Careful, Naomi," one of the footmen sneered, folding his arms as others chuckled. "Don't mistake the master's medicine for poison again. Next time he might actually fire you instead of just yelling." Her face heated. She kept her eyes down, clutching the tray in her hands tighter, praying her trembling fingers wouldn't betray her. "Shame," another maid added, her tone syrupy but cruel. "So young, so silly." Thought she was saving his life when all she did was embarrass herself. Naomi's throat ached. She wanted to shout that they hadn't seen what she had, that his skin had gone gray, his breath ragged, his hand shaking like it could barely hold the glass, but the words locked in her chest. Defiance could cost her more than dignity here. She slipped past them without a word, delivering her tray into the kitchen. Still, their whispers followed like thorns under her skin. Later that evening, she was polishing the silver in the grand dining room when the air shifted, the hush that meant Damien had entered. Naomi kept her head bowed, cloth moving across a fork though her pulse thundered. He stood at the head of the table, speaking sharply into his phone. "I said double the shares, no excuses. If you can't manage it, I'll find someone who can." His voice was steel, his back straight, his hand gripping the phone like he seats would crush it. Then, almost imperceptibly, his other hand twitched, the tremor again. Naomi saw it before he slid it into his pocket, hiding it like a crime. Her heart squeezed. Whatever those pills were, they weren't simple vitamins. The call ended. Silence thickened. Damien's gaze lifted and landed on her. Naomi's breath caught. His ice-blue eyes pinned her, unreadable, hard. "You!" His voice sliced through the air. "Still here?" She set the fork down carefully, forcing her voice steady. "Yes, sir." For a moment he said nothing. His eyes searched her face, colder than glass, yet something flickered behind them, something haunted. "Don't," he said finally, his tone low and dangerous. "Ever touch me again." Naomi lowered her head. I didn't mean..." "Didn't mean?" He stepped closer, his shadow stretching over her. "Do you have any idea what those pills were?" Her lips parted, but no sound came. "Of course not." His laugh was bitter, humorless. "A maid meddling in things far above her place. You think you saw weakness, but you know nothing." Her chest tightened, shame mixing with something stronger, anger. She hadn't been trying to expose him, she had been trying to help. But his words left no space for her heart. "Yes, sir," she whispered. Damien turned away sharply, pouring himself a drink with a hand that trembled just enough for her to notice. That night, Naomi cried again. But this time, not from humiliation. It was frustration, raw and stinging. Why should she feel so small for caring about another human being? Why did compassion feel like a mistake in this house? She remembered Malik's voice over the phone last week, so bright with hope. "Naomi, when I graduate, you won't have to work so hard anymore." Her brother's dream needed her silence. His future was more important than her pride. And yet, even as she pressed her palms into her eyes, Naomi made herself a promise. She would find out what Damien Devereaux was hiding. 2 days later, she got her chance. The mansion was hosting a gathering. Sleek investors in dark suits and sparkling gowns filled the grand hall. Laughter mingled with the clinking of glasses as the string quartet played in the corner. Staff moved like shadows, pouring wine, carrying trays, ensuring perfection. Naomi worked quietly near the back, but her eyes followed Damien. He was flawless in a black tuxedo, golden hair shining under chandeliers, a smile that looked convincing from afar. To the guests, he was untouchable, power incarnate. But Naomi noticed, his hand tightening around a glass until his knuckles whitened, his smile flickering too quickly, the faint sheen of sweat along his temple. And then, she saw him slip a hand into his jacket pocket. The bottle. Her breath stopped. If he swallowed those pills here in front of everyone... She stepped forward without thinking, tray wobbling in her hands, only to be stopped by the head butler's hiss. "Stay back, don't cause another scene." Naomi's heart hammered. She forced herself still, but her eyes never left Damien. She knew the truth now. Something inside him was breaking, and sooner or later, it would shatter in front of them all. The laughter in the ballroom swelled, but Naomi barely heard it. Her gaze stayed locked on Damien. The glittering crowd of investors and socialites only saw the charm, his perfect smile, his commanding presence. But Naomi saw past it. His hands weren't steady. His jaw was tight. And in his pocket, she knew the pills rattled like a secret ready to spill. When he excused himself and slipped through a side door, Naomi's heart lurched. Without thinking, she set her tray down and followed, her shoes whispering against the marble floors. She found him in the corridor outside the study, one hand braced on the wall, his breath shallow. He pulled the bottle out with a trembling hand. "Sir," Naomi whispered. He spun, his blurred eyes blazing. "You again?" His voice was sharp, but weaker than before, cracking at the edges. Naomi stepped back, but didn't retreat. "Please, you don't look well. Those pills." "Stop." His grip tightened on the bottle. "You don't get to question me. You don't know what this is." Her hands curled at her sides. The old Naomi would have bowed, whispered an apology, and fled. But something inside her broke open. The memory of the servants' mocking laughter, the humiliation that weighed on her chest, her mother's voice reminding her of dignity, all of it rose at once. "You're right," she said, her voice shaking but louder than before. "I don't know, because you won't tell anyone. You hide it. You bark at us like we're nothing. But I saw you that night. You were in pain, and I cared. I still care, even if you think I'm nothing." His face froze, the words hanging heavy in the narrow corridor. For a moment, he looked less like a billionaire and more like a man cornered by his own secrets. "You..." His lips parted, but nothing came. He turned sharply, striding into his study, and slammed the door shut so hard the walls shook. Naomi's chest heaved. She pressed her hands against her skirt, trembling. She should have stayed silent. She should have swallowed her pride, but the truth was clawing its way out, and she couldn't unsee what she had seen. The days that followed grew heavier. Damien was harsher than ever. Every mistake, no matter how small, drew his sharp tongue. Naomi dropped a spoon. He snapped. She entered a room a second too late. He barked her name in front of everyone. Each word was a whip, meant to humiliate, meant to remind her she had no power here. The other staff smirked behind her back. "Should have kept quiet," one whispered as she passed. But Naomi endured, because behind his cruelty she had seen something else. Not strength, not pride, fear. And fear was human. One evening, Naomi carried linens up the staircase when voices drifted from Damien's study. The door was cracked, and she paused, heart hammering. Inside, Damien was on the phone. His tone wasn't the clipped authority he showed others. It was raw, frayed. "I can't keep doing this," he said, his voice cracked. "They'll see. Everyone will see. I built everything on being untouchable, and now, I can't even hold a pen without shaking." Naomi's breath caught. A silence stretched, then Damien's voice again, lower, almost pleading. "Just keep sending the prescription. No one can know." The call ended with a soft click. Damien sat heavily at his desk, his head in his hands. For the first time, Naomi saw him not as a tyrant, but as a man breaking apart in solitude. She wanted to step in, to say something, anything, but her courage faltered. If he found her here, eavesdropping, she would lose everything. She backed away slowly, her chest aching. The breaking point came 3 nights later. The mansion was hosting another event, this time a dinner for investors. The air buzzed with conversation, the chandeliers dripping with light. Damien stood at the head of the long dining table, raising his glass to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his smile brilliant, "to success." And then it happened. His hand jerked violently, the glass slipping and shattering across the marble floor. His body swayed, his face drained of color. A hush fell over the room as Damien Devereaux, the untouchable, the ruthless, the feared, collapsed in front of everyone. Gasps rippled. Some guests half rose from their chairs, unsure whether to move closer or stay back. The staff froze in terror. Naomi didn't think. She rushed forward, catching him before his body hit the ground. His weight was heavy against her, his breaths shallow, his eyes wide with panic. The room stared. The master of the mansion, undone, and the maid, the one he'd humiliated, holding him steady. "Don't look at me," Damien rasped, his voice broken. But everyone was already looking. And Naomi knew in that moment, his secret would not stay hidden any longer. Damien's body convulsed slightly in Naomi's arms, his breath ragged, his fingers clutching at her sleeve as though he were drowning. The ballroom was silent, utterly, painfully silent, except for the distant shatter of crystal still echoing on the marble floor. Naomi tightened her grip around him, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. "You're not alone," she whispered, her words meant for him, but they carried into the tense air. Gasps fluttered through the crowd. A billionaire, crumbling in front of them. A maid, cradling him like the only anchor keeping him upright. "Someone, get water," Naomi called. No one moved. Eyes darted, lips parted, but fear and shock kept them still. So she raised her voice. "Now!" At last a servant hurried off. Damien, pale and shaking, tried to pull away, but his strength failed. His eyes, those cold, cutting eyes, were glassy with something raw, something naked. "Let me go," he croaked, shame dripping from each word. "Not here. Not in front of them." Naomi shook her head gently. "You can't hide this anymore." Two security men rushed forward as if to take Damien from her, but he raised a trembling hand. "No!" His voice was hoarse, breaking, but it carried enough authority to halt them mid-step. He forced himself to stand straighter, though Naomi still steadied him. The entire hall held its breath. Damien's chest rose and fell rapidly. His eyes swept the room, dozens of investors, staff, and guests watching him. For years he had built his empire on control, on fear, on never letting anyone glimpse weakness, and now, under their gaze, the mask had shattered. His voice faltered. He swallowed hard, his throat working like it was lined with glass. "I've spent my life convincing all of you that I'm untouchable." A murmur ripped. Damien's hands trembled openly now. He didn't hide them. "But the truth is, I'm sick. I've been sick for years. These pills," he held up the bottle with a shaky hand, "aren't power. They're chains. I take them to stand upright in front of you, to keep the empire from crumbling, but every day I feel myself slipping." Gasps, whispers. Some looked horrified, others sympathetic. Damien's gaze flicked down to Naomi, still steadying him. His voice cracked. "And the only one who saw me for what I am, the only one who cared enough to stop me, is the woman I shouted at, humiliated, and tried to erase." Naomi's breath caught. "I was cruel," Damien continued, his voice breaking fully now, tears welling in his eyes. "Because I was afraid. Afraid of being seen like this. Afraid of being human." His knees buckled, and this time he let them. He sank to the polished marble floor, not in collapse, but in surrender. His head bowed, his voice a whisper that carried through the stunned silence. "I'm sorry." The room was frozen. A billionaire, kneeling, apologizing, not to his investors, not to his peers, but to a maid. Naomi felt every eye on her. Her heart raced, but she bent slightly, placing a hand gently on his shoulder. "Sir," she said softly, "you don't need to kneel." But Damien shook his head, tears sliding down his pale cheeks. "I don't know how else to make it right." Her throat tightened. She thought of the nights she'd cried alone, of the cruel laughter of the other staff, of the sting of his words. And now, here he was, stripped bare, trembling, begging. The silence broke. Someone in the crowd began to clap, slowly, hesitantly. Then another, and another. The sound grew, rolling like a wave through the grand hall. Applause, not for Damien's power, but for his vulnerability. Naomi's chest swelled with something she hadn't felt in this mansion before: dignity. The staff carried Damien carefully from the hall, but his hand never let go of Naomi's. And when the heavy doors closed behind them, his voice, shaky, broken, whispered again. "Don't leave me, toi. Yeah." Naomi's eyes burned with tears she didn't let fall. For the first time, Damien Devereaux wasn't her master. He was a man, and in that moment, she knew the balance of this house would never be the same. The mansion was no longer the same. In the days after the dinner, silence hung heavier than the chandeliers. Staff tiptoed through corridors, their whispers edged with awe and disbelief. The story had already begun spreading, first among the servants, then out into the city. The ruthless Damien Devereaux brought to his knees in front of everyone, and not by a rival or a scandal, but by his own hidden illness and a maid who dared to catch him when he fell. Naomi felt the weight of their stares. Some were curious, some resentful, some quietly respectful. For the first time since she started at the estate, she wasn't invisible anymore. Damien didn't leave his room for 2 days. The doctor came and went, carrying his secrets in a leather bag. Naomi was assigned to deliver meals to his door, though they always returned untouched. She hesitated outside his chambers, listening to the muffled coughs, the restless pacing. Once, she thought she heard him crying. On the 3rd day, when she brought in a tray of soup, his voice startled her. "Come in." Her hand froze on the handle. Slowly, she pushed the door open. Damien sat by the window, not in his immaculate suits, but in a simple shirt, the sleeves rolled to his elbows. His hair was unkempt, his eyes ringed with exhaustion. He looked less like a billionaire and more like a man stripped of armor. "Set it down," he said quietly. She placed the tray on the table, unsure whether to retreat. But before she could turn, his voice stopped her. "You stayed." Naomi blinked. "Sir?" "That night," Damien said, his gaze fixed on the window. "You could have let me fall. You should have, after everything I said to you." He finally turned to her, his eyes raw, stripped of their usual frost. "Why didn't you?" Naomi swallowed, fingers twisting in her apron. "Because I saw someone hurting, and I couldn't walk away." For a long moment, silence stretched. Then Damien's face crumpled just slightly, as though the weight he'd carried for years was pressing too hard to bear. "No one's ever stayed," he murmured. "Not when I was like that." Naomi's chest tightened. She wanted to say something comforting, but words felt too small, so she simply nodded, her gaze steady. By the end of the week, change rippled through the mansion. Damien was still sharp-tongued at times, still impatient, but there was hesitation now, cracks in the ice. He snapped less often. He listened more. The staff didn't know what to make of it. "He's softened," whispered one maid as Naomi passed. "Since that night, it's like he's different." But not everyone approved. The butler, Mr. Graves, pulled Naomi aside one afternoon, his voice low and stern. "You've crossed a dangerous line. Whatever bond you think you have with him, it will not last. Men like Mr. Devereaux do not change." Naomi held his gaze, surprising even herself with her firmness. "Maybe not, but he's trying." Graves's lips tightened, but he said nothing more. The true test came the following evening, when Damien called the entire staff to the great hall. They gathered nervously beneath the chandeliers, whispers flitting like moths. Damien entered dressed in a simple suit, no tie, his expression solemn. He stood at the center, scanning the faces of those who had served him for years. "I've ruled this house with fear," he said, his voice low but steady. "I thought it made me strong. I thought if I never showed weakness you would respect me. But what I built was not respect. It was silence. Fear." No one moved. Naomi stood at the edge of the crowd, her heart pounding. "I can't undo what I've done," Damien continued. "But I can start again. You deserve better than the man I've been." His gaze faltered for a fraction of a second, then settled. On Naomi. "And if I can change, it's because someone finally had the courage to see me as a man, not a monster." The staff turned, eyes falling on Naomi. Her cheeks warmed, but she held her chin high. Damien's voice thickened. "From this day forward, no one in this house will be treated as less than human. Not by me, not by anyone." The silence that followed wasn't fear. It was shock. Then, slowly, one by one, heads nodded. The change had begun. That night, Naomi walked back to her small attic room, her steps lighter than they had ever been. She thought of Malik, of her mother, of the girl she had been when she first entered the mansion. Shy, invisible, afraid. She wasn't that girl anymore. And though she didn't know what lay ahead, she knew one thing for certain. Damien Devereaux was no longer the same man, either. Morning light spilled across the mansion's marble floors, but the air felt different now. Lighter, as if the heavy silence that once suffocated every corner had cracked open. Staff moved with less fear in their steps. The kitchen bustled with quiet chatter. Even the maids who once mocked Naomi glanced at her differently, though pride kept them from speaking it aloud. Change had begun, and everyone knew it. Damien was in the garden when Naomi found him. The sharp autumn air carried the scent of damp earth, and for once he wasn't in a tailored suit but a wool sweater, his golden hair ruffled by the wind. He leaned on the wrought iron railing, staring out over the grounds like a man relearning how to breathe. Naomi hesitated before stepping forward. "You wanted to see me, sir?" He turned, and his face softened when he saw her. "Yes, sit." She perched on the stone bench across from him, hands folded in her lap. "I've been thinking," Damien began, his voice slower than usual, careful, "about what happened. About everything I've done. To you. To everyone how. Naomi stayed quiet, letting him speak. "I thought I was protecting myself," he said, eyes dropping to his trembling hands. "Hiding the illness. Pretending I was invincible. But all I did was build walls that kept everyone out, and the crueler I became, the safer I felt. Until you—" His eyes lifted, meeting hers. "You saw through it, and I hated you for it. Because I couldn't hide." Her chest tightened. His honesty was raw, unpolished. No longer the voice of the ruthless billionaire, but of a man uncloaked. "I owe you an apology," Damien said, his throat working. "Not just for shouting at you that night or for humiliating you in front of the staff, but for treating you as less than human. You deserved better. You still do." Naomi's eyes stung. She searched his face, looking for arrogance, for pretense, but found only sincerity. "I forgive you," she said softly. His breath caught, as if those 3 words carried more weight than any fortune he'd built. For a moment he closed his eyes, letting them settle into him. Word of Damien's apology to the staff and his new approach spread quickly beyond the mansion. Investors who once admired his ruthlessness were startled by his humility. Some scoffed, calling it weakness, but others leaned closer, drawn to a version of Damien that felt human. Inside the house, the staff's fear slowly loosened its grip. Naomi noticed the difference in small things. Voices less hushed, laughter daring to slip through hallways. And when Damien passed, people no longer shrank away. They met his eyes. But the biggest change was within Naomi herself. No longer did she lower her head in shame. No longer did she swallow tears in silence. She had stood in front of the entire mansion, holding Damien as he broke, and it had given her a voice she didn't know she possessed. One evening, as Naomi folded linens in the laundry room, 2 maids approached, the same ones who once mocked her. "You were brave," one admitted, her tone reluctant but real. Naomi looked up, startled. "What?" The other maid sighed. "We thought you'd be gone by now, but you stood up when none of us would have dared, and he listened to you." Naomi smiled faintly, not triumphant but humbled. "Sometimes, caring looks like foolishness. But it isn't." The maids exchanged glances, then nodded, retreating. For the first time, Naomi felt not mocked, not pitied, but respected. Later that night, Damien sought her out again. He stood in the doorway of the laundry room, his posture less rigid than it had ever been. "Naomi," he said quietly. She turned, folding the last sheet. "Yes, sir?" He hesitated, as if the word sir unsettled him now. "I don't know what the future holds. I can't promise I'll change overnight, but I can promise I'll try. And if you ever see me slipping, if I ever treat you as less again, I want you to remind me. Don't let me forget." Her heart swelled. She nodded slowly. "I won't let you." Damien's lips curved. Not quite a smile, but close. "Good." For the first time since she'd known him, his footsteps as he left didn't echo like thunder. They were simply human. Naomi stood alone in the laundry room, the linens folded neatly beside her. She thought of Malik, of her mother, of the girl who once cried in silence after being shouted down. That girl was gone. The woman who remained knew her worth. And Damien Devereaux, handsome, ruthless, broken, and rebuilding, would never look at her the same way again. The final days of autumn painted the mansion grounds in gold and crimson. Naomi stood by the tall windows of the east corridor, sunlight warming her face as she looked out at the gardens. For the first time since she had entered this house, she didn't feel like a shadow. She felt present, real, unhidden. Life in the mansion had shifted. The staff walked lighter. Laughter, once muffled, drifted freely. Even the strict butler, Mr. Graves, seemed to breathe differently, his posture less stiff, his words less biting. Change had started at the top, and trickled down like light through stained glass. Damien was in the library when Naomi found him. The massive shelves towered above, filled with books that hadn't been touched in years. He was seated at a desk, papers spread out, glasses perched low on his nose. The tremor in his hands remained, but it no longer seemed like something he was desperate to hide. "Naomi," he said, glancing up, his voice softer now when it carried her name. "You asked for me?" she replied, stepping closer. He nodded, folding his hands together. "I'm leaving for treatment. A clinic overseas. I've avoided it for too long. But if I want to keep living, truly living, I can't hide anymore." Her heart clenched. For a moment, she imagined the mansion without his presence. No clipped commands, no piercing gaze, no sudden outbursts, only silence. "That's good," she said finally. "It's brave." A faint smile touched his lips. "You think so?" "I know so," she answered. He rose slowly, walking toward her. For once, he didn't tower over her as a master over a servant. He stood before her as a man, uncertain, humbled. "I owe you more than an apology," Damien said. His blue eyes shimmered, not cold but earnest. "You gave me back something I didn't even realize I'd lost. Dignity. Humanity. Without you, I'd still be pretending, still destroying myself in silence." Naomi shook her head gently. "You gave that back to yourself. I only refused to look away." His throat worked as though he were swallowing words too heavy to release. Finally, he lowered his gaze. "When I return, I don't want things to go back to how they were. I want this house to be different, and I want you to stay." Naomi's breath caught, not as a command, not as a plea, but as an invitation. "I'll stay," she said, her voice steady, "as long as I can walk these halls with my head high, not invisible, not small, just me." Damien's eyes lifted, and for the first time his smile was unguarded. "That's all I could ask," the day of his departure arrived quietly. A sleek car waited at the gates, luggage loaded. Staff gathered in the foyer, murmuring goodbyes. Naomi stood near the back, hands folded, her chest heavy with unspoken words. Damien paused before leaving, his gaze finding her instantly in the crowd. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, in front of everyone, he walked to her. "Naomi," he said, his voice carrying in the hush. "Thank you." Simple words, but they struck deeper than any declaration. Naomi bowed her head slightly, not in submission, but in respect freely given. "Safe travels, Damien." The car disappeared beyond the iron gates, and the mansion seemed to exhale. Naomi turned, her footsteps carrying her through the grand halls. The portraits still loomed, the chandeliers still glowed, but something fundamental had shifted. She passed the corridor where she had once cried alone, humiliated and small. She remembered the whispers, the laughter, the sting of his cruelty, and she remembered the moment she chose to act, to step forward, to see him when no one else would. Now, her steps echoed with pride. The mansion no longer belonged only to Damien's shadow. It belonged to every person who lived and breathed within its walls. And to Naomi, who had entered as a maid and remained as a woman who dared to change its heart. Outside, the autumn wind carried leaves across the lawn, scattering gold into the sky. Naomi paused at the doorway, breathing in deeply. The mansion was not a prison anymore. It was a place of change, of second chances. She closed her eyes, and for the first time since she arrived, she allowed herself to smile.